I say that this lies within the realm of human potentiality. Now, what are the conditions that could make these potentialities unfold in the same sense that a child unfolds from a fetus, becomes a baby, and then after it becomes a child and becomes an adolescent, prepubescent, adolescent, and so on, all the phases of life. And if I try to reason that out, and that's where dialectical reasoning is important, thinking organically in a sense, not simply geometrically within a mere ordinary time-space framework where the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, but more in terms of self-development and self-actualization, and not simply self, but social development and social actualization. I thereby develop the moral basis for a critique of the society. After all, if there is no rationality in the world, who am I to call this world irrational? If there isn't justice in this world, or freedom in this world, at least insofar as speculative thought working out from real potentialities in human beings, the rational unfolding of their possibilities to its full actualization, who am I to say that any society is unfree? If I don't know what ought to be because it is rational, and through a process of reasoning that is dialectical or organic, if I don't know what justice and freedom mean, or consciousness means, who am I to say that this society is unconscious, that this society is unfree, and this society is unjust? All of this, and this lies at the basis of all my thinking, what I've called this dialectic of reasoning out these potentialities, and recognizing that thought can go beyond reality as it exists, that the what ought to be stands as an abiding challenge of the what is. If that tension does not exist, then I succumb to the what is. I become what is called a realist. Now let me give you a story of a realist. I have a chap whom I know called Joschka Fischer. When I first met him, I believe he was a taxi cab driver. He lived in Frankfurt, and he was more revolutionary than thou. How you couldn't compare with him. After all, driving in a taxi cab, living this vagrant gypsy life, making his livelihood where he could, dressed in shabbiest clothing, God knows what, and preaching, the need. Spanti is what he called himself, a Spanti. Before there were autonomes, there were Spantis, okay, in Germany. Dressing in black, Joschka would go around and say, what, you're going to the university, you're becoming a lawyer? Civil rights. There are no civil rights under this system. Why defend them? You only make the system work better. Great. Joschka put me to shame. Then guess what happened? Joschka decided, together with Danny Cohn-Bendit, the Red, to join the Green Party, the Grünen. They came to the conclusion capitalism is here to stay. So what can we do that is socially valuable? What we can do, and I think this is a terribly important lesson, is we join the system as leftists. We join the Green Party and we say capitalism is here to stay, but let's make it the best possible capitalism we can have. Not only in terms of the capitalists, but in terms of ordinary people. So they became leaders of the Greens, and they drove out the revolutionaries in a bitter fight. Okay? They were driven out. Then they took over the party, they and a few others like them. They took over the Green Party. And then Joschka said, well, if I'm going to improve the capitalist system and make it better, more democratic, more ecological, I should run for public office. Okay, if you ran for public office in Frankfurt, it would be one thing. You'd see, you'd be under people's eyes. You could be controlled. You could be turned out of office, especially if you have councils all around you, or assemblies to control you. A libertarian municipalist approach. No. He went ahead and he ran for the city council. Got elected. Then afterward, the Greens put him up for the Hessian Lande, the Landtag, which is the equivalent of the state government. I don't mean the federal government, the state government. So he ran there. And before long, he decided the best thing he can ultimately do to fulfill all his dreams about improving capitalism was to become the environmental minister. He became the environmental minister. Now, several problems arose. First, they wanted to ship the waste around Frankfurt or in Hesse over to Bremen. And the Greens there said, why are you sending us your nuclear junk? Greens poisoning the environment of other Greens? They said it's unparty-like. Then afterward, in the meantime, he got increasingly corpulent until he's, I don't know, somewhere in the range of about 350 pounds now. And he started dressing up because, after all, you can't be a minister, without having a tie and a shirt. If you could find the necktie, get around them. And he started showing reporters his various bedrooms, one in the capital city of Hesse, and the other one in Berlin, because he's also in Bonn, because he's also on the Senate, you see. And it went on and on and on like this. And then afterward, he called for unification working together with the SPD, Social Democrats. And the Social Democrats for a while were prepared to embrace him and talked about sharing the government. And they did share the government in Hesse, to keep the right-wing CDU out, which would be the equivalent of the Republican Party. Now the Social Democrats, number one, don't want him. Why? Because environment is a dirty word compared to jobs, besides which they took over the environmental program, considering that it was a reformist program. Since, after all, Yoshka was not fighting the system, he was trying to make the system work better. So it was easy, you took it over. Then the Greens had a kind of dark, sinister origin. They were on the left. They were reputedly on the left, even though they said neither left nor right but forward. Okay. So the SPD decided the Greens are going to be a liability, that they get only 4% of the crossover vote from the Greens, whereas in point of fact they could get 14% of the vote from the CDU if they disallowed the Greens. So the SPD has just recently come out and declared it doesn't want to have anything to do with Yoshka, the Social Democrats. So now Yoshka has, I'm just told, a bright idea. And it isn't the first time it's been voiced in the Greens. We're going to work with the equivalent of the Republican Party. Why? What are you going to hold? You're going to hold an office? You're going to hold 2 bedrooms, 2 offices? And you're going to keep gaining weight? It's going to kill you anyway. I feel like sending him a carton of Ben & Jerry's ice creams on a regular basis. I don't want to be vindictive toward either of them. I just want to show you this lesser evil of policy which leads you to a greater and greater and greater evil. And the system puts you exactly in that corner. Germany is a historical example of that. The Social Democrats took over the government in 1919 by crushing the extreme left, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, who were the founders of the German Communist Party before Stalin came around. Then after that, the Social Democrats had to make a deal with the Center Party, okay? Because if they didn't deal with the Center Party, then the Conservative Party would come along. Then afterward, the German Social Democrats, going through the 1920s, had to deal now with the Conservative Party, because if the Conservative Party didn't win, Hitler would win. And finally, they voted for the Conservative Party, and guess what happened? Hitler was appointed Chancellor, and they were suppressed. This politics of lesser evil, this ethics of lesser evil, appalls me. And I feel very critical of it. So this whole ensemble of views that I presented, and I don't think that you can present one-liners without being utterly superficial, represent the reasons why it is important to remain a revolutionary, and very importantly, why it is terribly important to form a revolutionary movement. I don't mean going back to the 1935s and 36s of my generation when I was young. I certainly believe that one should reclaim from every period what is valid. But the point is, above all, to recognize how much is at stake the moment one gives up this revolutionary commitment, and the knowledge that must go with it to reinforce the commitment, and the experience, particularly of people like Yoshka, or particularly of the SPD, the German Social Democrats, between 1919 and 1933, when Hitler finally crushed them. And that is what keeps me alive right up to 73, more or less.
Murray, earlier you were talking about the Port Huron statement and the beginnings of the New Left. I was wondering if you could explore further the framework out of which that grew, and then some of the successes of the New Left and the failures